He existed in the shadows, a phantom haunting the back corner of Kennel Run C12. To the overworked shelter staff, navigating the daily cacophony of barks, meows, and urgent needs, he was less a dog and more a problem, a case file stamped with frustration and quiet despair. They called him Ghost, not just for his pale, dirty white coat, but for his ethereal lack of presence, his ability to seemingly dematerialize into the concrete walls. Mostly, though, they whispered the word that felt like a final verdict: unreachable. Ghost arrived under circumstances shrouded in grim speculation, confiscated during a raid on a property involved in illegal activities. His history was a tapestry woven with threads of unimaginable cruelty and profound neglect. No one knew the exact horrors he had endured, but the evidence was etched deeply into his psyche and visible in the tremor that constantly shook his skeletal frame. He was utterly, terrifyingly broken, not just physically thin and scarred, but fractured in spirit, shattered into a million pieces of fear and mistrust. Any attempt at interaction was met with a predictable, heartbreaking sequence. Approaching his kennel door elicited low guttural growls, rumbling deep in his chest, a desperate warning fueled purely by terror, not aggression. If the door opened, he would frantically scramble to the farthest point, pressing himself flat against the cold concrete, making himself as small as physically possible, head averted, eyes squeezed shut, or darting wildly, seeking an escape route that didn't exist. If a hand dared to enter his space, even one holding the most tempting food, it was met with frantic snapping, teeth bared, not in challenge, but in sheer, panicked self-defense. He wanted nothing from humans, not food, not water if offered by hand, and certainly not comfort. He existed in a self-imposed prison within the shelter's walls, a state of perpetual high-alert shutdown. Seasoned animal control officers and experienced shelter volunteers exchanged resigned glances after attempting to assess him. "He's feral," one might mutter. "Too far gone," another would sigh, the weight of too many similar cases heavy in their voice. Resources were stretched thin. Kennel space was always at a premium. The grim reality was that dogs like Ghost, deemed psychologically damaged beyond repair, often faced the bleakest of outcomes. He showed zero signs of adaptation, zero inclination towards connection. He was, by all practical shelter metrics, unreachable. His time was running out, the unspoken conclusion hanging heavy in the air. But then Alina saw him. Alina wasn't a regular volunteer. She ran a small, specialized rescue, focusing specifically on severe trauma cases, the dogs others deemed hopeless, the ones discarded by society and failed by humanity. She had heard about the unreachable dog in C12 and felt that familiar, painful tug of responsibility. She didn't believe any dog was truly beyond saving, only beyond the patience or understanding of those trying to reach them. Seeing Ghost pressed into the corner, trembling violently, radiating sheer terror, didn't fill her with frustration, but with a profound, aching sorrow and a fierce determination. She saw past the defensive growls and the frantic snapping. She saw a soul drowning in fear, desperately needing a lifeline. She saw the flicker, however faint, of a life worth fighting for. "I'll take him," she stated quietly but firmly to the bewildered shelter manager. "He needs more time, more space, a different approach." Transferring Ghost from the shelter to Elena's quiet, rural rescue facility was an ordeal in itself, requiring immense patience, careful maneuvering with catchpoles and protective gear, not for aggression's sake, but to manage his paralyzing panic without causing him further trauma. He arrived at Elena's sanctuary and immediately bolted into the large, secure, indoor-outdoor run prepared for him, disappearing into the doghouse inside, refusing to emerge for hours. Elena knew this wouldn't be a typical rehabilitation. This wasn't about basic training or socialization. This was about deconstructing years of terror and attempting to build, molecule by molecule, the very foundation of trust. Her approach began with radical acceptance and zero pressure. For the first week, she didn't even try to interact directly. Her goal was simply for Ghost to tolerate her presence in his vicinity. She would enter the adjoining area, visible through the chain-link divider, several times a day. She'd sit quietly on a stool, facing away from him, reading a book aloud in a soft, calm monotone. She never stared, never approached the dividing fence, never spoke directly to him. She simply existed near him, projecting calm, predictable energy. She placed his food and fresh water near the entrance of his run. When he was securely inside his doghouse, then immediately retreated. At first, he wouldn't eat or drink until she was completely out of sight, often waiting until the dead of night. He spent nearly all his time huddled in the farthest, darkest corner of the doghouse, a quivering mass of white fur. Progress wasn't measured in days, but in weeks, sometimes feeling like agonizingly slow months. The first breakthrough, if it could even be called that, was almost imperceptible. After nearly 3 weeks of Elena's quiet presence routine, Ghost didn't immediately bolt deep into the doghouse when she entered the adjacent area. He remained just inside the doorway, watching her with wide, fearful eyes, tense as a coiled spring, but not completely hidden. Elena felt a surge of cautious optimism, but kept her outward demeanor utterly neutral, continuing to read softly, pretending not to notice this minuscule shift. The next tiny step involved food. Elena started leaving extremely high-value treats, tiny pieces of cooked chicken or cheese, just inside his run, several feet away from his bowls. After refreshing his water, for days they remained untouched. Then, one morning, she noticed a single piece was gone. He had dared to retrieve it, likely only after she was long gone, but he had taken it. This became part of the new routine. Gradually, she placed the treats slightly closer to where she would sit, still making no demands, still leaving immediately after placing them. Weeks turned into a month, then 2. Ghost began, occasionally, to eat his regular meals, while Elena was present in the adjacent area, though he remained hypervigilant, ready to flee at the slightest unexpected sound or movement. He started spending brief periods outside the doghouse, but still within his run, usually pressed against the back wall, observing her. Elena continued her patient ritual. Sit, read softly, leave treats, depart calmly. She celebrated the infinitesimal signs of progress privately, the slight softening of his posture when she spoke, a moment where his frantic scanning paused to briefly look towards her, the time he picked up a treat while she was still visible, albeit retreating immediately to eat it in hiding. The real test came when Elena needed to start building positive associations with her presence, not just tolerance of it. This required entering his actual run, an escalation that risked undoing weeks of painstaking work. She began by opening the gate to his run, tossing a high-value treat several feet inside, and then immediately closing the gate and walking away. She repeated this multiple times a day. Ghost learned quickly. Gate opening meant chicken appeared. He started anticipating it, watching the gate, though still retreating as she approached. Slowly, ever so slowly, She decreased the distance. She retreated after tossing the treat. Eventually, she could toss the treat and remain standing just outside the open gate. Ghost would dash forward, snatch the treat, and retreat to eat it, his fear warring visibly with his desire for the reward. Then came the monumental step. She opened the gate, placed the treat just inside, and remained kneeling quietly right there. After several long minutes of internal conflict, trembling visibly, Ghost darted forward, snatched the treat from mere inches away from her still hand, and vanished back into his safe zone. Alina didn't move, didn't react, just breathed steadily, allowing him this victory without pressure. This process, micro steps forward, occasional setbacks triggered by a dropped tool outside or a car backfiring down the road, continued for what felt like an eternity. Alina began leaving her hand, palm down and still, near the treat. Weeks passed before Ghost's snatch and retreat maneuver included the briefest, feather-light brush of his muzzle against her fingers. He recoiled as if burned, but he had initiated contact, however accidentally. Learning to trust a hand, likely the source of immense pain in his past, was perhaps the biggest hurdle. Alina spent hours simply sitting inside his run near the entrance, hand resting limply on her knee, making no attempt to reach for him. She continued reading aloud, sometimes humming softly. She scattered treats around her. Gradually, Ghost's retreats, after snatching a nearby treat, became less frantic, his safe distance slightly reduced. He started watching her hand with intense, wary curiosity rather than sheer panic. One afternoon, months into this painstaking process, Alina was sitting in her usual spot. Ghost approached cautiously, took a treat from the floor near her foot, and instead of immediately retreating, he paused. He stood frozen for several seconds, sniffing the air near her still hand. Then, tentatively, he stretched his neck forward and gave her fingers a single, fleeting lick before backing away, looking startled by his own bravery. Alina remained perfectly still, heart pounding, tears stinging her eyes. It was the first intentional, voluntary connection. A molecule of trust had been formed. From that point, progress remained slow, but became slightly more consistent. Ghost started taking treats directly, gently, from her flat palm. He allowed her to remain sitting closer. He stopped growling defensively when she entered his run, though he remained watchful and easily startled. Alina introduced a soft fleece blanket into his doghouse. He eventually curled up on it. She rolled a soft ball gently into his run. After days of ignoring it, he nudged it tentatively with his nose. Introducing a collar and leash seemed impossible initially. He panicked at the mere sight of them. Alina started by simply leaving a soft collar near his food bowl for days, associating it with meals. Then, she held it while giving him treats. Eventually, she could gently touch his neck with the soft fabric for a split second while he took a treat. Clipping on a leash, even for a moment, took weeks more of gradual desensitization. The first time he stood, trembling but tolerant, while the lightweight leash was attached for 3 seconds before being immediately removed and rewarded, felt like winning the lottery. The true turning point, the moment that solidified hope, occurred unexpectedly. Alina was cleaning his run, moving slowly and predictably, as always. Ghost was watching from his usual safe distance. Alina stumbled slightly over the water bucket, catching herself quickly, but making a sudden movement. Ghost flinched violently, bracing for a blow, but instead of bolting into his house, he looked at Alina's face. Seeing her calm expression, hearing her soft apology, he visibly relaxed, shaking his head slightly, as if shaking off the fear memory. he didn't run. He processed the situation and chose not to panic. He was learning predictive safety. Later that same day, while Alina sat reading, Ghost quietly approached, nudged her hand with his nose, and then leaned his scarred head against her knee for several seconds, emitting a soft, almost inaudible sigh. He was actively seeking comfort, seeking connection. He was choosing to trust. Ghost's transformation was not about becoming a normal dog overnight. He remained sensitive, wary of strangers, and terrified of loud noises or chaotic environments. He would likely always carry the invisible scars of his past. But he was no longer broken. He learned to solicit gentle affection from Elena, leaning into her touch with closed eyes. He developed a tentative, goofy playbow, inviting interaction. He learned to walk calmly on leash in the quiet fields surrounding the rescue, exploring smells with cautious curiosity. His tail, once perpetually clamped down in fear, now offered soft, hesitant wags when Alina approached. He was learning what it felt like to feel safe, perhaps for the first time in his life. The ghost who arrived, deemed unreachable, was unrecognizable from the dog who now greeted Alina each morning with a soft nuzzle and hopeful eyes. Finding an adoptive home for him would require an extraordinary commitment, a quiet, adult-only home with experienced, deeply patient people willing to continue building his confidence and respect his boundaries, possibly forever. Alina knew such homes were rare, and she was fully prepared for Ghost to remain with her as a permanent sanctuary resident. If the perfect match never materialized, his well-being and sense of security were paramount. But his journey was already a profound victory. Ghost's story became a beacon of hope, shared cautiously by Alina, not with sensationalism, but with reverence for his resilience. Watching this dog, systematically dismantled by cruelty, painstakingly piece himself back together and learn the terrifyingly vulnerable act of trusting a human again, was a powerful testament to the enduring strength of the canine spirit. They said he was unreachable, a broken case beyond repair. But patience, compassion, and an unwavering belief in his worth proved them wrong. Ghost's journey, molecule by molecule, from paralyzing fear to tentative trust, was a lesson in healing, a miracle witnessed not in a sudden flash, but in the quiet, persistent dawn of a spirit refusing to be extinguished. He reminded everyone who knew his story that no soul is truly lost if someone is willing to sit in the darkness with them, offering a steady light for as long as it takes.